Winter of 1944, somewhere over the English Channel. A B-17 falls out of formation, 2 engines completely dead. Everyone on board knows what comes next bailout. Take your chances in that freezing water below. But the pilot? He stays right there at the controls. He's not following protocol. He's ignoring physics. He's tuning out every voice on the intercom, screaming that it's over. There are 10 men breathing hard inside that metal tube, and he's dead set on getting all of them back home. The 8th Air Force calls it strategic bombing. The guys flying these missions? They call it something closer to suicide in broad daylight. Every run over occupied Europe is basically a numbers game. How many planes take off? How many make it back? How many guys never see England again? By late 1943, those numbers are pretty brutal. More than 30% of bomber crews don't make it through their 25-mission tour. Some groups lose half their men. Flak tears wings apart at 20,000 feet. German fighters swarm around those mile-long formations like angry hornets. And still, the bombers keep going up wave after wave, day after day. The B-17 Flying Fortress is supposed to live up to that name. 1350 caliber machine guns, armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, 4 Wright Cyclone engines, pumping out almost 5,000 horsepower. It's built to take a beating and keep flying. But here's the thing: a direct flak hit doesn't care about good engineering. A 20mm cannon shell through the cockpit doesn't respect American know-how. The guys flying these things are mostly in their early 20s. Farm kids from Iowa, factory workers from Detroit, college kids who left their calculus classes to learn a different kind of math, the bombardier kind. They wear heated suits against the -40-degree cold up there. They breathe through oxygen masks. They watch their buddies' planes blow apart in mid-air, and then they climb back into their own plane the next morning. The culture around these bomber groups is strange. You've got superstition mixed with hardcore engineering precision. Lucky jackets, pre-flight rituals, nose art with pin-up girls, and cartoon characters. But underneath all that tough guy act, there's this razor-sharp awareness of death. The empty beds, the boxes of personal stuff getting shipped home, the letters that start with, "We regret to inform you." Briefings happen before the sun's even up. Officers pull back curtains showing maps with red string stretching deep into Germany targets, flight paths, known flak zones, fighter bases. The intelligence guys talk in these calm voices about high-priority objectives. The crews? They're hearing their life expectancy dropping. Flying in formation is like religion to these guys. Tight boxes of planes give you overlapping firepower. A bomber by itself is a dead bomber, and the German pilots know it. They look for stragglers, damaged planes falling behind, anything that loses position and becomes easy prey. The rules are crystal clear. Stay in formation. Follow the lead bomber. If you get hit and start losing altitude, the formation keeps going without you. The mission is bigger than any one crew. The target matters more than the 10 guys in one airplane. Makes sense, right? Brutal, but it makes sense. Except this logic doesn't account for pilots who think outside the box. If you want to hear more stories like this, hit that like and subscribe button so these lives don't get forgotten. Robert Rosenthal grew up in Brooklyn during the Depression. His dad ran a small business. His mom held the family together through the tough years. Robert was sharp, quick with numbers, good with his hands, the kind of kid who'd take apart radios just to see how they worked, then put them back together even better. He went to Brooklyn College, studied chemistry, was thinking about law school. Then Pearl Harbor happened, and everything changed. By 1943, he's a first lieutenant learning to fly the heaviest bomber America's got. Flight school instructors notice something about Rosenthal right away. He doesn't just follow the rules. He learns them, really gets them, then asks, why? Why this altitude for this move? Why this power setting for that situation? He wants to understand the machine on a deeper level than just memorizing steps. His crew comes together stateside before they ship out. 10 men who are about to get real familiar with violent death. Co-pilot, navigator, bombardier, flight engineer, radio operator, all turret gunner, 2 waist gunners, tail gunner. Each guy's a specialist, each one depending on the others. They land in England in the fall of 1943, assigned to the 100th Bomb Group at Thorpe Abbotts. The 100th has a reputation, and it's not good. They've been getting hammered. Other groups call them the Bloody 100th. It's not a term of endearment. Rosenthal flies his first mission in September, a raid on Stuttgart. Heavy flak, aggressive fighters. His plane takes hits, but makes it home. He learns what the briefing rooms can't teach you. The sound of shrapnel ripping through aluminum, the smell of gunpowder and hydraulic fluid, the way fear sits in your chest like a stone. He keeps flying. Bremen, Munster, Schweinfurt. Each mission teaches him more about what the bomber can and can't do. He pays attention to stuff other pilots ignore, how the plane handles with different fuel loads, how it responds when engines quit, how far you can push it before something major breaks. Between missions, there's the waiting. English weather, mud, cold Quonset huts, nervous energy with nowhere to go except into card games and letters and restless sleep. Some guys break. Some request transfers. Some just stop functioning and get sent home. Rosenthal stays focused. His crew starts trusting him the way bomber crews have to. They see how he prepares, how calm he stays under fire, how he brings them back when other planes don't return. Trust in a bomber crew isn't sentimental. It's practical. It's survival. By early 1944, Rosenthal's flown more than a dozen missions. He's seen formations get torn to pieces. He's watched B-17s spiral down trailing fire. He's heard radio calls from pilots who know they're not making it home. And he's developed this theory that goes against everything the Air Force teaches. He believes you can bring a crippled bomber home, alone without formation support, without altitude, without half your engines if you have to. He thinks the math works if you really understand the aircraft. If you're willing to fly it past what the manual says. If you put crew survival ahead of doctrine. He doesn't broadcast this theory. The group commander wouldn't be on board. The operations officer would cite regulations. Other pilots would call him crazy. So he keeps it to himself, a private belief built on what he's seen and what makes sense. A plan for a situation he hopes he'll never face. The briefing on February 25, 1944, reveals a target that makes even experienced crews go quiet, the Messerschmitt factory at Regensburg, deep in southern Germany, over 600 miles from England, beyond fighter escort range for most of the trip. The strategic thinking makes sense. Regensburg builds Bf-109 fighters. Destroy the factory, reduce their fighter force. Simple. Except the Germans know how valuable this target is, and they defend it like crazy. The weather's iffy. Low clouds over England, fog at altitude, the kind of conditions that make formation assembly tough. But the mission gets the green light. Maximum effort every bomber that can fly. Rosenthal and his crew head to their B-17 in the pre-dawn darkness. The plane's cold, frost on the wings. The ground crew's already done their checks, but Rosenthal does his own walk-around anyway. It's a ritual, a way to know the machine before trusting it with 10 lives. Engines fire up with puffs of blue smoke. 4 massive radials turning over, thunderous sound across the whole airfield. Dozens of bombers coming to life. The smell of high-octane fuel and oil, the vibration running through the whole frame. Takeoff's routine. Formation assembly, not so much. Visibility's terrible. Bombers circle the field, climbing slowly through cloud layers, finding their group, finding their spot in the box. Takes longer than planned. Fuel burns, engines strain. They cross the channel in formation. 24,000 feet up, temperature way below zero. The English coast disappears behind them. Ahead is occupied Europe. Ahead are German fighter bases. Ahead is the flak belt ringing every strategic target. First fighters show up over Holland. Focke-Wulf 190s. They make head-on passes at combined closing speeds over 500 miles per hour. The B-17's guns pound away. Spent shell casings rain down inside the plane. The fighters peel off and come back again. Rosenthal holds formation. The lead bomber sets the pace. The group stays tight. This is doctrine. This is survival. But bombers are already going down. He sees one to the left lose a wing, it tumbles, no shoots. He sees another streaming fire. From the number 3 engine, it drops away. The formation closes the gap and keeps going. Over Germany, the flak starts. Black bursts blooming at altitude. Each burst is shrapnel expanding at killing speed. The pilots can't dodge. Formation flying means steady course and speed. They fly straight through the flak because the target demands it. The bomb runs the worst part-long minutes of straight and level flight while the bombardier makes his final adjustments. The plane basically belongs to the Norden bombsight now. The pilot just maintains heading. The flak gunners below know this. They know the bombers can't maneuver. They adjust their aim accordingly. Bombs away. The B-17 jumps upward, suddenly 4,000 pounds lighter. The formation starts its turn away from the target. Flak continues. Fighters come back. Then Rosenthal's plane takes a hit. Flak burst close enough to rock the whole thing sideways. Shrapnel punches through the fuselage. Alarms go off. Number 2 engines trailing smoke. Oil pressure dropping. He feathers the prop and shuts it down. 3 engines now. The formation's pulling away. Standard procedure, they can't slow down. He pushes more power to the remaining engines. The B-17 struggles to keep up. Fuel consumption goes up. He does the math in his head: range versus fuel, speed versus altitude. The numbers aren't good. And number 4 engine starts overheating. Cylinder head temperature climbing into the red. The engineer reports possible coolant loss. Rosenthal knows what this means. He's got minutes before that engine quits, maybe less. He calls to the crew. Prepare to bail out. Standard procedure. The safe procedure. 10 parachutes. 10 chances over German territory. Some might escape and evade. Some might become POs. All would probably survive. But Rosenthal looks at the instruments, looks at the map, looks at the 2 engines still running, and does different math. The co-pilot repeats the suggestion: bail out now while they've got altitude. The navigator agrees. They're over Germany, alone, 2 engines, no fighter cover, no formation. Every German pilot in the area will spot them. Rosenthal tells them no. He's done the math. 2 engines give enough thrust to keep flying if he reduces weight and accepts lower altitude. The fuel they've got left is enough if he plots the most direct route home and doesn't waste a drop on evasive moves. The plane's damaged, but the structure's sound. Controls respond. Hydraulics work. His voice on the intercom is calm. We're going home together. Stay on the guns. Watch for fighters. We'll make it. The crew's flown with him long enough to know his tone. This isn't fake courage. This isn't denial. This is a decision based on actual analysis. They trust his math more than they trust parachuting into Germany. He drops the B-17 out of formation altitude down to 15,000 feet. Lower altitude reduces engine strain, lets the remaining engines run more efficiently. It also puts them in range of every light flak gun on the ground. But he's betting on being a moving target versus a predictable one. The crippled bomber limps north, alone against the sky. The gunners scan constantly for fighters. The engineer watches the surviving engines like his life depends on it, which it does. The navigator gives heading corrections. The radio operator listens for distress calls from other bombers. Any intel about German fighter activity. Rosenthal flies manually. no autopilot. He feels the plane through the controls, the vibration, the response, the way it wants to yaw, with uneven thrust. He compensates by instinct, hands and feet making constant tiny adjustments. The formation's way ahead now, probably crossing back into Holland, probably starting descent toward England. His crew won't see Thorpe Abbotts at the same time as everyone else, if they see it at all. West of Munich, a pair of Bf-109s spot them. Lone bomber, low altitude, wounded easy kill. They come in from behind. The tail gunner opens up first, then the waist gunners. Tracers arc across the sky. Rosenthal doesn't make aggressive moves. He can't, the plane's too fragile. Instead, he makes small, controlled movements, just enough to mess up the fighter's aim, just enough to give his gunners better angles. The 109s make one pass, then another, then break off. Maybe low on ammo, maybe surprised by the defensive fire from a supposedly dying plane. Over France, the weather starts getting worse. Cloud layers thicken, visibility drops. This cuts both ways. Clouds hide them from fighters, but clouds also hide the ground. Navigation becomes guesswork now. Dead reckoning. The fuel gauges keep dropping. Rosenthal recalculates constantly fuel flow versus distance, wind correction versus time. He adjusts the mixture settings to lean out the engines, saving every gallon, stretching the range. His co-pilot suggests landing in France, find an emergency field somewhere. The navigator mentions Switzerland neutral territory, internment's better than death. Rosenthal acknowledges these options, then keeps heading toward England. A channel appears ahead, gray water under gray sky. The white cliffs of Dover, somewhere in the haze. Rosenthal starts a shallow descent, saving fuel, preparing for the final leg. The English coast materializes. The crew lets out a collective breath. But they're not safe yet. The fuel situation's critical. The engines have been running at max continuous power for hours. Temperatures are high. Oil pressure's marginal. Rosenthal radios ahead. Emergency landing. 2 engines out. Fuel critical. Priority approach. The tower acknowledges, clears the pattern. Emergency crews stand by. But Thorpe Abbotts is still 20 miles away. And number 3 engine starts to sputter. The fuel gauge for number 3 reads empty. Tanks dry. The engine coughs once, twice, then dies. The prop windmills uselessly. Rosenthal feathers it immediately. 1 engine now. Just number 1. The only thing between 10 men and a very hard landing. The B-17 descends, whether he wants it to or not. Physics is calling the shots now. 1 engine can't maintain altitude with the plane's weight. He manages a controlled descent 200 feet per minute, then 300. The altimeter unwinds. His co-pilot's on the radio giving position updates. The navigator calculates time to base. The engineer watches, that last engine like a man watching a dying friend. The gunners are silent. They've done their job. Now it's entirely on the pilots. Rosenthal scans ahead, looking for Thorpe Abbotts, looking for the runway, looking for any flat piece of English farmland if it comes to that. The clouds are low, maybe 800 feet. Below, that is ground trees, buildings, stone walls that'll tear a plane apart. Airspeed's critical. Too slow, and they stall. Too fast, and he won't be able to stop on the runway. He balances the equation with throttle and trim, flying the narrow space between 2 kinds of death. 5 miles out, altitude 600 feet and dropping. The tower calls wind direction and speed, runway alignment. He'll have a tailwind, not ideal, but there's no fuel to circle around and approach from the other direction. 1 shot. 4 miles. Number 1 engine temperatures in the red. The engineer reports possible imminent failure. Rosenthal acknowledges without emotion. He needs 3 more minutes from that engine. Just 3 minutes. 3 miles. Altitude 400 feet. He can see the base now. The runway. The pattern's been cleared. Every other plane's been diverted or is holding. Emergency vehicles are positioned along the runway, waiting. 2 miles. He lowers the landing gear. The hydraulics groan. Gear doors open, wheels lock down, green lights confirm. One small mercy. The drag from the gear increases descent rate. He compensates with a slight bump in throttle. The engine responds barely. 1 mile, altitude 200 feet. He's too low and too slow. The stall warning horn keeps chirping. The B-17's flying right on the edge of falling out of the sky. But he's lined up with the runway. He's going to make it to the field. Whether he makes it onto the runway in one piece is still an open question. The fence at the end of the runway passes underneath. Rosenthal's flying on pure instinct now, built from dozens of landings and hundreds of hours in this aircraft. He can feel the controls going soft, the plane settling, the ground rising. He pulls the throttle to idle. The engine spools down. The B-17 drops the last 20 feet onto the runway. Hard, the tires scream. Shock absorbers compress violently. Metal groans, but the gear holds. No brakes at first. He lets the plane slow naturally, then applies brakes gently. Too much, and the tires blow. The runway ahead is long enough. He's got room. The bomber slows. 50 miles per hour. 40, 30. He steers off the active runway onto the taxiway. Emergency vehicles follow. He continues to a hard stand away from other aircraft, just in case. Just in case fire starts. Just in case something finally breaks. He sets the parking brake. Shuts down the last engine. The sudden silence is overwhelming. For hours there's been engine roar, wind noise, radio chatter, gunfire. Now there's nothing. His co-pilot looks at him. The crew starts moving. Hatches open. Men climb out onto the wing, stand on solid ground. They don't cheer. They don't celebrate. They're too exhausted, too aware of how close it was. Rosenthal completes the shutdown checklist muscle memory. Procedure. Then he climbs out. The ground crew's already inspecting the damage, counting holes, checking what needs repair. The B-17 looks like it flew through a shredder. Over 200 shrapnel holes, 2 engines destroyed, fuel tanks nearly dry, hydraulic fluid leaking. The crew chief walks around slowly. He's seen damaged bombers before. He's seen planes written off as total losses. He stops near Rosenthal, shakes his head, asks how they made it back. Rosenthal doesn't answer right away. He's looking at the bomber, the machine that held together, the engineering that proved good enough, the math that worked. He tells the crew chief they flew it carefully. The mission debrief happens 2 hours later. Intelligence officers want details target assessment, fighter encounters, flak concentrations. Rosenthal gives them the information methodically. But the questions eventually turn to the flight home, the decision not to bail out, the single-engine landing. The operations officer's skeptical. Bringing a crippled bomber back alone isn't standard procedure. It's not recommended. It's barely possible. He suggests Rosenthal got lucky. Rosenthal doesn't argue. He just presents the calculations: fuel consumption at reduced altitude, thrust requirements for 2 engines than 1, weight reduction from expended ammo and bombs, distance versus endurance. The math is solid. Other pilots in the room listen carefully. They're thinking about their own crews, their own possible situations. Doctrine says bail out, but Rosenthal just showed them there's another option, another possibility. The group commander ends the debrief without explicitly approving or disapproving Rosenthal's decision. But the story spreads through the squadron, through the group, through other bases. The pilot who brought them all home on 1 engine. What the group doesn't know yet is this isn't a one-time thing. This is a pattern starting to form. Over the next 3 months, Rosenthal flies 17 more missions. Bremen, Berlin, Augsburg targets deep in Germany. Each mission carries the same risks: flak, fighters, weather, mechanical failure. And repeatedly, his plane takes serious damage. Engine lost over Brunswick. Hydraulic failure over Kassel. Flak damage so bad over Frankfurt that the group commander assumes the plane's gone. Each time, Rosenthal brings the crew home. He refuses to abandon aircraft that other pilots would call unflyable. He becomes known for improvisation, for understanding the B-17's limits better than the engineers who designed it. On a mission to Posen, his bomber loses 2 engines and half the rudder. The normal response? Bail out over friendly territory. Rosenthal calculates a different answer. He trims the plane to compensate for the missing rudder, uses uneven thrust from the remaining engines to keep directional control, flies 300 miles back to England at 4,000 feet. The crew never questions him anymore. They've learned his calculations work, that his understanding of the aircraft is complete, that his priority is always getting everyone home. Other crews start requesting transfer to his command. Pilots want to learn his methods. Gunners want the survival rate his crew shows. By May 1944, Rosenthal's completed his first Tour 25 missions. Standard rotation is back to the States, training duty, a break from combat. He volunteers to stay. Another tour, another 25 missions. The odds of surviving 50 missions are basically 0. He understands the math. He stays anyway. The Air Force starts studying what he does. Operations officers interview his crew. Engineers examine the damage patterns on his planes. They're trying to figure out what he does that others don't. Part of its technical knowledge, he knows engine performance curves from memory, understands structural load limits, studied aerodynamics beyond what flight school teaches. Part of its decision-making under pressure, he doesn't panic, doesn't freeze. He processes information fast and acts on logic rather than fear. But part of it's something harder to pin down. A belief that the machine will hold together if you understand it completely. That the math works even in the worst situations. That bringing everyone home is possible if you refuse to accept any other answer. By August 1944, Rosenthal's flown over 50 missions. He's become a squadron commander. His methods are now semi-officially recognized. Pilots get informal briefings on his techniques. Stay with the plane longer, understand your margins, calculate rather than react. Survival stats for his squadron improve noticeably. Fewer bailouts, more successful emergency landings, more crews coming back intact. The Air Force doesn't change official doctrine. But in practice, on the line, the culture shifts. Doctrine starts acknowledging what Rosenthal proved, that sometimes the right choice isn't in the manual. That crew survival can depend on one person understanding the machine beyond standard procedures. That courage plus logic changes outcomes. Other bomber groups start adopting similar approaches. Pilots push damaged planes further before abandoning them. Engineers give better training on emergency procedures. The knowledge base expands. The impact's measurable. 8th Air Force casualty rates drop slightly in late 1944. Not dramatically, the war's still deadly. But at the margins, more men survive. More crews come home. The statistical curve bends slightly toward survival. Rosenthal himself never talks about heroism. When people ask about his decisions, he discusses math fuel calculations, engine performance, weight, and balance. He frames everything in technical terms. The emotional side stays unspoken. But his crew understands. They know the difference between a pilot who follows procedure and one who knows when to break it. They know every landing at Thorpe Abbotts with the full crew aboard represents a choice, a calculation, a refusal to accept the standard answer. By war's end, Rosenthal's flown more than 50 combat missions. He's been awarded the Distinguished Service Cross. His plane has come back from missions that should have ended in bailouts or crashes. His crew has survived against odds that killed thousands of others. The 7 Bridges part of the story refers to a specific mission sequence in April 1944. Series of raids on transportation infrastructure across Germany. Rosenthal's bomber group hit 7 bridge complexes over 10 days. Each mission faced brutal opposition. Each mission left his plane seriously damaged. Each mission ended with the full crew back at base. The unofficial count by his ground crew? Over 900 flak and bullet holes across those missions. The B-17 he flew most often spent more time getting repaired than flying. But it always flew again, patched, fixed, ready. Robert Rosenthal survives the war. He returned stateside in late 1945. Law school, a career built on the same logic and precision that kept him alive at 24,000 feet. He practices law for decades, raises a family, lives a quiet civilian life. He rarely talks about the war. When asked, he deflects the real heroes didn't come home. The men who deserve recognition are in the military cemeteries across Europe. He was just doing his job. But at reunions of the 100th Bomb Group, the surviving crews seek him out. They remember the missions where he refused to give up, the landings that seemed impossible, the quiet confidence that made survival feel possible even when logic said otherwise. In interviews done decades later, his former crew members describe him with consistent words: unflappable, brilliant, stubborn. The pilot who understood that bringing everyone home wasn't just preferable, it was possible. And possibility, once demonstrated, becomes precedent. The B-17 itself becomes legendary. Over 38,000 built during the war, millions of flight hours logged, thousands lost. But the stories that stick aren't about the plane, they're about the men who flew them. The decisions made at altitude, the calculations done under fire, the refusal to accept impossible odds. Rosenthal's contribution to aviation isn't a specific invention or technical breakthrough. It's a proven principle that understanding your machine completely expands what's possible. That doctrine has limits. That sometimes survival depends on knowing when to break the rules. Modern aviation training includes scenario-based decision-making, descended from lessons learned in bombers over Germany. Commercial pilots train for engine-out procedures, using principles Rosenthal applied instinctively. Military aviation doctrine acknowledges the gap between textbook procedure and field reality. The bomber offensive over Europe cost the 8th Air Force over 26,000 dead, more than the entire Marine Corps lost in the Pacific. The casualty rate among bomber crews exceeded almost every other military specialty. The young men who flew these missions understood the odds. They flew anyway. Rosenthal's story stands out, not because he was uniquely brave. Thousands of bomber crews showed equal courage. He stands out because he proved that intelligence applied to courage improves survival. That calculation in the face of fear isn't cold, it's practical. It's human. When he died in 2007, his New York Times obituary mentioned his Distinguished Service Cross, his 52 combat missions, his legal career. What it couldn't fully capture was the number of men who lived because he refused to accept standard procedures as absolute. At his funeral, survivors from his crew showed up, old men now, remembering when they were young and scared and trusting a 24-year-old pilot with their lives. They talked quietly among themselves about missions that should have ended differently, about the calculations that kept them breathing. One crew member, interviewed years before, tried to explain what made Rosenthal different. He said it wasn't fearlessness. Rosenthal was scared like everyone else. But the fear didn't override the logic. The fear existed right alongside the calculation. And when the math said something was possible, he believed the numbers more than the fear. That's the legacy. Not recklessness dressed up as courage. Not luck mistaken for skill. But disciplined application of knowledge under pressure. The refusal to give up when alternatives exist. The quiet proof that competence and courage together change outcomes. Most of the B-17s are gone now. Museums hold a few dozen survivors, carefully restored, polished, very different from the beat-up planes that limped back to Thorpe Abbott's with smoking engines and failing hydraulics. But the principle remains. Understand your machine, respect the limits, but know them precisely. When the manual says it's over, check that conclusion. Calculate, consider, act. Rosenthal brought 10 men home repeatedly when doctrine said it couldn't be done. He showed that the line between possible and impossible is often thinner than official procedure admits. That sometimes the best choice is the one that's in no manual. 7 bridges, 52 missions. 10 crew members brought home every single time. The numbers are exact because the man flying those missions fought in numbers, fuel and weight, and thrust and time, variables in an equation where the answer was always survival. They said the idea of a crippled bomber flying home alone was wishful thinking. They pointed to doctrine and statistics and common sense. And then he did it. Not once, but over and over, until it wasn't remarkable anymore. Until it became something other pilots tried. Until what was possible expanded to include what had been written off as impossible. That's how wars are won at the margins, not just through grand strategy, but through individual moments when one person calculates differently, acts on it, survives, and in surviving, shows a truth that changes what others attempt. Robert Rosenthal never claimed to be special. He insisted he was just careful, methodical, willing to do the math when others went on instinct. Maybe that's the real lesson, that heroism often looks like precision, that courage can be quiet, that the most important victories are measured in people brought home, not targets destroyed. The sky above England is peaceful now. No formations of heavy bombers climbing through morning clouds. No flak bursts at altitude. No young men calculating fuel versus distance while engines die. But the principle lives on in every cockpit where a pilot faces impossible circumstances and reaches for calculation instead of panic. In every moment when training and intelligence combine to create solutions. In every crew that makes it home because someone refused to accept the official answer. Rosenthal proved that knowing your machine better than anyone else gives you options others don't see. That logic under fire isn't cold. It's the warmest thing there is. It's how you bring everyone home.